This video is going to review the concept from class called machines. You may be asking yourself, what are machines? When you think about it, maybe a picture of a computer comes to mind, or maybe a robot. Well, in science, it's actually much simpler than that. A machine can be as simple as a box. And with that box, you can possibly have a ramp, creating an inclined plane. This is one of our simplest machines. So how does this become a machine? Well, our book defines machines as a device that makes doing work easier. And work is very, very important because we've learned in class that work can be defined as W equals F times D, where the force, or F, is multiplied by D, distance, to determine the amount of work. Well, machines help to make doing work easier. So if we look back at using the inclined plane as an example, using it as a machine, it helps to make work easier by changing force and distance. So if we take a book and we try lifting it up and sitting on top of this box, we have to apply a lot of force to resist gravity over a short distance. But if we take the same book and we put it on our ramp, we have to put less force to move that book up the ramp, but yet the distance is a lot longer. So in this case, we can see how a machine would help to make work easier, but it doesn't change the amount of overall work. So in our example, we increased the distance that the book had to travel, but at the same time, we lowered the force. So you can see how this would be very important if you were trying to move a heavy object. And that's why we have ramps in order to move heavy objects, instead of taking the stairs or trying to lift them vertically. So this tells us that work is not going to change with our machine. It always stays the same. So let's look at another example. If we were to use a car jack to lift a car up, maybe to change its tire, we would use a car jack. Now, we would apply a very small amount of downward force, moving the handle down, and it would have to go a certain distance in that direction. Now, the jack would respond by applying a very large force upward onto the car, and we would also have a very, very small distance that the car would move. Cars are very heavy, so we really would need a machine to help us lift it. Now, because we're looking at work, right, the amount of work being done on the car using the jack is the same as if we were lifting up with our bare hands. But the difference is that we have an increased upward force because we've increased the distance. This is where our equation comes in. Right? Work is equal to force times distance. So if we can manipulate force and distance over time, or over the distance of moving that object, we can actually make it easier to move it. Let's look at this in some more detail. So if you're operating this jack and you push down on the handle, that's actually called an input force. That's the force applied by the person. Now, the car is going to respond, and that responding force is called the output force. That's the force being applied by the machine. And our distance of the handle, the distance being applied by the human, is the input distance, which is a lot more in this case than the distance that you would see in the car. And the car's change in distance would be output. So this all comes back to our equation with work. We know that work equals force times distance. In order to move an object, such as this car, we would have to consider the ideal machine equation, because the amount of work being done on the car by the person, which is work in, has to be equal to the work out that is actually being applied to the car by the machine. So if we were to take our equation, where force times distance is used to find work, we can break it down into, that would be force in, force out, and distance in, and distance out. And this sets up a type of equation that we would call an inverse relationship. To learn more about ideal machines and the ideal machine law, you can look forward to another video where we go further and talk about this topic. In review, remember, machines are a type of device that makes doing work easier. It doesn't change the amount of work, it only makes it easier for people to move objects.